Unknown international sound.
Hey guys, what's going on? I'm Adam Carswell, and today I want to talk to you about the most eye-opening, deep, amazing books I have ever read, and that is The Creature from Jekyll Island. I think even after reading this just one time is like still me just barely scratching the surface. This is the 5th edition, and it's by G. Edward Griffin. My hat is tipped to anyone out there watching this that has already read this book, because you know what I'm about to get into. And for those of you who have not read it, may this video serve as a brief summary and a teaser for the tons of information, for the amounts of information that are in here that I'm not going to be able to cover today. I think what I have for you though is a pretty accurate analysis of what the book talks about, and that is the Federal Reserve, which is probably a word most people watching this video have heard before, but probably don't know much about the Federal Reserve except for it is basically the financial institution that not only runs our country of America, but the entire world. So let's dive straight into it. This book is like a textbook. It's not even really written in chronological order. It's just loaded with facts. And that's the cool part, is it is loaded with some facts that you will never find in grade school, middle school, high school, college. You gotta go to a book like this to get the truth. And at the end of the day, I think that's what we're all after, is we want to know the truth. So I've got some truth for you coming up right here. What is the Federal Reserve System? The answer may surprise you. It is not federal, first of all, and there are no reserves. Furthermore, the Federal Reserve banks are not even banks. As I just mentioned, the key to this riddle is found not at the beginning of this book, not at the end, but in the middle. The Federal Reserve System should be abolished for the following reasons. 1. It is incapable of accomplishing its stated objectives. That can be referenced in chapter 1 of this book. 2. It is a cartel operating against public interest. That will be found in chapter 3 of the book. 3. It is a supreme instrument of usury. You can find information on that in chapter 10. It encourages war, chapter 14. It destabilizes the economy, chapter 23. And number 6, it is an instrument of totalitarianism. That's referenced in chapter 5 and chapter 26. You can do that by 1, getting yourself a copy of the book, or 2, just go on Google, type in 5th edition, The Creature from Jekyll Island PDF, and you can follow along right here with me. What's most interesting and captivating about the Fed is the fact that everything is centered around and based upon a paper currency, paper tender. Before 1913, when it was created, gold and silver were primary pushers in not only the American economy, but everywhere around the world. Once this transition from gold and silver to paper came into effect is when the Fed really first got their grasp on the American economy. So let's rewind, as I just referenced, before any of this existed, back to a time when George Washington was president. Let's hear how the American economy was doing back then. The December 16th, 1789 edition of the Pennsylvania Gazette declared, "Since the federal constitution has removed all danger of having paper tender, our trade has advanced 50%. The years 1793 through 1808 were years of unparalleled prosperity for the U.S., one of the greatest it's ever seen. Exports mounted from 19 million in 1791 to 93 million by 1801. On the specific subject of paper money without being backed by gold or silver, George Washington wrote, 'We may one day become a great commercial and flourishing nation, but if in the pursuit of the means we should unfortunately stumble again on unfunded paper money or any similar species of fraud, we shall assuredly give a fatal stab to our national credit, in its infancy. So, from the beginning of our great country, back when America was honestly operating more of a free market, or a common term that we hear nowadays, black market, that's when there was freedom and prosperity. The paper money is what ultimately began to water down the American economy to the point where not only us, but many other countries around the world are in serious debt because of currency spending. So how did this system of currency being created out of thin air, how did it start? Where did it come from? Some say, well, the book actually references that it began in the late 1600s, but it really ramped up and took a huge stab at the US in the mid to late 1800s when J.P. Morgan, very famous name, had a firm that was in big trouble, where he was then bailed out by a group of individuals known as the Rothschilds. Very well-known name for particular reasons. So the Rothschilds continued to bail out J.P. Morgan, who now became a financial agent of theirs, and was then used as an American to help win over the American population. And not only that, but J.P. Morgan and Rockefeller were actually rivals and competitors. They didn't like each other. But around that 1911, 1912, 1913 time frame, they said, you know what? Let's team up, forget about our past. We're gonna go in on this with the Rothschilds and many other individuals and put together this system called the Federal Reserve. So the individuals who are running the Federal Reserve and creating this fake market, printing money out of thin air and holding all of the American citizens hostage, they're up to a lot more than just messing around with money. They also have what's, for the best way to put it, a world agenda. And we have facts and we have proof to back up this information as well. One group in particular that is basically in control of this world agenda is the Club of Rome. It's a group of global planners that release end-of-world scenarios based on predictions of overpopulation and famine. Membership is international, but some of the famous American roster includes Jimmy Carter, Harlan Cleveland, Claiborne Pell, and Saul Lonowitz. Let's read a little bit more about this Club of Rome. It's actually very disturbing. This is probably one of the deepest things that I read in the book, and it actually made me want to stop reading it for a second just because of how disgusting it is. What is the Club of Rome's solution to overpopulation? A world government to control birth rates if necessary and apply euthanasia. That is a gentle word for the deliberate killing of the old, the weak, and of course the uncooperative. Following the same reasoning advanced at Iron Mountain, the Club of Rome has concluded that the fear of environmental disaster could be used as a substitute enemy for the purpose of unifying the masses behind its program. In its 1991 book entitled The First Global Revolution, we find this. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. So that's actually pretty interesting as well too, because I think I would have to agree with that. But just because humanity itself is the real enemy doesn't mean humanity must be manipulated. In regards to the Club of Rome, Fabian socialist Bertrand Russell expressed it this way. A scientific world society cannot be stable unless there is world government. It will be necessary to find ways of preventing an increase in world population. If this is to be done otherwise than by wars and famines, it will demand a powerful international authority. This authority should deal out of the world's food to various nations in proportion to their population at the time of the establishments of authority. If any nation subsequently increased its population, it should not on that account receive any more food. The motive for not increasing population would therefore be very compelling. Very compelling indeed. These quiet-spoken collectivists are not kidding around either. For example, one of the most visible environmentalists and advocates of population control was Jacques Cousteau. He was interviewed in 1991 by the United Nations and said these exact words, which this is where I was basically ready to just close the book and just start reading it later, because you would never think that someone would say this. Here's the quote. "What should we do to eliminate suffering and disease? It is a wonderful idea, but perhaps not altogether a beneficial one in the long run. If we try to implement it, we may jeopardize the future of our species. It's terrible to have to say this. World population must be stabilized, and to do that we must eliminate 350,000 people per day. This is so horrible to contemplate that we shouldn't even say it, but it is just as bad not to say it." That is a quote from someone who has been glorified publicly. How come we never heard that quote in the public? That's just disgusting. It's terrible. As you can see here, this is a picture of individuals serving with the Red Cross, another organization that we've basically been trained, as I would say, as Americans and individuals of the world, to worship and glorify without any question. So the individuals in that picture were all actually bankers, or as some like to call them, banksters, that were in the Russian Civil War and were busy, were busy funding both sides of the war, so that way when the war was over, that they would be on good terms with the winner. And that was all under the umbrella of the Red Cross while they were doing such illegal things. And if you want a reference to go look this up, the individuals in that picture were J.W. Andrews, Raymond Robbins, Alan Wardell, and D. Haywood Hardy. Humanitarians. One of the most influential families in the establishment of the Federal Reserve in the United States was the Rockefeller family. And talk about putting on a front to make the people think that you're doing something when you're really not doing it. We have a picture here of John D. Rockefeller doing one of his public stunts, which is giving a little kid on the side of the street a dime, which obviously was worth a lot more back then as well. And you know, that was to show, look, America, I'm such a great person. I'm rich, but I'm giving back to you, and I would never do any harm to you except for create the death threat of your economy, which is the Federal Reserve. The direct quote in the book says, "John D. Rockefeller Sr. is shown giving a dime to a child while the admiring crowd looks on. This is one of his favorite public stunts. It was conceived by his public relations staff as a means of offsetting adverse publicity regarding his business and dealings. Large-scale philanthropy was an extension of that in the same technique." So even to this day, be cautious of the individuals that we all look up to and worship for being rich or wealthy. This is not an accusation, it's just an awareness, a way to promote awareness. But you know, anyone out there, just because they're giving to charity does not mean that they are someone with good intentions for us. And here we have John D. Rockefeller presenting a check to the United Nations, which I would say, I'm going to go on a little spiel about the United Nations after I read this quote right above the picture. John D. Rockefeller presents a check in the amount of $8.5 million to Tryggve Lie, the first Secretary General of the United Nations. The date was March 25th, 1947. The money is for buying the land on Manhattan Island, which will house the United Nations building. Through the Council of Foreign Relations, the Rockefellers have been in the forefront of the drive for a world government which is to be built upon the principles of socialism and feudalism. They have no doubt that they and their counterparts in other countries will be in control. And with that, I would like to bring to light what's really going on with the United Nations. It's interesting to me. It's actually very, very mind-blowing, and you know, as I mentioned, this entire book is just so mind-blowing. But from the time that we're little, as far as I can remember, grade school, where we're taught education that is, in a sense, forced down our throats. You know, you gotta memorize it, whatever. Anyways, the United Nations was always painted as this peaceful, you know, world peace organization that has everyone's best intentions in mind, and it's it's crazy because the United Nations are actually probably one of the biggest threats to the entire world. And there's no tie. Any tie with the word peace in United Nations is one of the biggest smoke grenades that exists today. The United Nations are the future of the world, of the world government that's being established. All right, I'm reaching a point where I want to wrap things up, but I want to encourage you to continue to do this research on your own. Earlier, when I referenced different chapters in the book, man, go buy this book. Please get the book on tape, to download the PDF, get the physical copy. Go buy it and read it for yourself, because as I mentioned, this is basically a great introductory to all the other facts that are found within this cover. I hope I gave you a lot of food for thought with some of the things that we just talked about. I want to end on a few more notes that I have written down here. We must choose, and actually this is a direct quote from the book. We must choose between two paths. Either we conclude that Americans have lost control over their government, or we reject this information as a mere distortion of history. In the first case, we become advocates of the conspiratorial view of history. In the latter, we endorse the accidental view. It is a difficult choice because we have been conditioned to laugh at conspiracy theories, and few people will risk public ridicule by advocating them. On the other hand, to endorse the accidental view is absurd. Almost all of history is an unbroken trail of one conspiracy after another. Conspiracies are the norm, not the exception. My own personal words after reading this book, as I come to the conclusion and summary, I find that this book has more hidden information than any other I have read to this date. It is eye-opening and at the same time stomach-churning to know that these processes actually existed. It is the duty of anyone reading, watching, or listening to do all that they can to educate the public and ultimately eradicate the systems that are mentioned in this book. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to my Facebook page or to my YouTube channel. July 11th through the 14th of this year, 2018, I will be heading to Las Vegas for Freedom Fest 2018 alongside my colleague Hunter Thompson, who is the managing principal of Cash Flow Connections. We will be in Vegas growing and expanding the brand of Cash Flow Connections, which is a private equity fund focused on investments in the commercial space. Particular assets are mobile home parks and self-storage. Thank you for listening again. I'm Adam Carswell, and remember, in all you think, say, and do, take it to the next level.